Good evening. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Urbana City Council to order. If the clerk would call the roll, please.
Ms. Ammons?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Madigan?
Here.
Ms. Marlin?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Mayor Pressing?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. I acknowledge that there are some changes to the agenda. Item number 10 will be pulled from our mayor's office, who has that item incomplete. And we will also acknowledge that there is a closed session of property acquisition, which will go into the place of item number 10. Are there any other changes to this agenda? Seeing none, so we'll approve that agenda and move on. Approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All right, moved by Mr. Roberts, second by Ms. Diane Marlin. Oh, I skipped staff report. There's no staff, no, I'm just kidding. Are there any staff reports? I apologize for skipping you all. There's a council report
Well, I would like to ask a staff member for an update if I could.
on,
If Mr. Gray can give us an update on Windsor Road, which I see has a lot of cement put down.
no, I skipped staff reports that we didn't have any.
When will parts of it or all of it, all of the new part be open?
Yes, there's been a lot of concrete poured on Windsor Road. We start at the west end, working east. It's my understanding, weather permitting, that the concrete pours will be done this week, which is good. From that point, then there will be the usual backfilling of curbs and that sort of thing. It's sometime next month, I want to say maybe the middle or so, before Thanksgiving, we should have the 2 westbound lanes open for travel. The 2 eastbound lanes then will be closed throughout the winter period until we remove that pavement and start the work next year. So we will not be trying to fill potholes or what have you on the 2 eastbound lanes. They'll just be closed. So the traffic will still be constricted, if you will, with the 2 lanes. But yeah, the contractor's making nice progress. Work is going well. Tests and everything is being reported to me are good, and I think we're pretty much on progress. Oh, Race Street opening, you know, I'm not sure if that will be this week or not. It should be very soon. If it's not this week, it will be next week, the Race Street intersection. And we will not close any of the north-south intersections the rest of this year. Next year, though, we'll have the 3 legs closed at separate times. 2 of those obviously at File, the north side and south side. So that will be a tough one. That will be disruptive because that's a busy traffic retail area. And then the south leg of Ray Street will be closed at Windsor Road 2 next year. So as we usually do, we get a press release out to everyone ahead of time to let you know. And they typically will go no more than 4 weeks, and maybe as short as 2 weeks is kind of how each leg of traffic's been going so far at those intersections. Any other questions? Or
Just one question. Since that's new concrete, I understand sometimes you can't put salt on new concrete right away. Should people expect some other treatment this winter?
well, we are using a product to help seal it and cure it better for this time of year. So that's one aspect that we're using. Secondly, through the training of our crews, we're going to be very discreet, if you will, on any kind of salting along there. But it's not to preclude it from happening, but we want to try to minimize it. But the fact that we're using a product to help cure it out quicker, better, and protect it, it should be a good preventative measure for that. But true, you like to have more months than what we're giving the pavement before you start applying salt on it.
Thank you. Mayor Preston?
Yes, we have a new finance director. I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Hannon. This is her first day. I don't think she has a financial report for tonight. Okay.
Well, welcome, Ms. Hannah, and thank you so much. All right. Any other staff reports that I have missed? All right, thank you. We'll go back to approval of the minutes already been moved and seconded. Are there any other changes or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Those minutes passed. And we are at public input. I'm going to ask the mayor to do her proclamation first, and then we'll come to public input.
Whereas on November 17th, 1911, Omega Psi Phi fraternity was founded at Howard University by 3 undergraduate students, Edgar A. Love, Oscar J. Cooper, and Frank Coleman, with the assistance of their faculty advisor, Professor Ernest E. Just. And whereas from the initials of the Greek phrase meaning friendship is essential to the soul, the name Omega Psi Phi was derived. The phrase was selected as the motto. Manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift were adopted as cardinal principles. And whereas from these humble beginnings, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated has had an active presence in Urbana, Illinois, since chartering Pi Psi, an undergraduate chapter on the campus of the University of Illinois on October 29, 1929. And whereas its original fraternity house located at 1203 West Stoughton, Pi Psi chapter currently serves as the oldest continually active undergraduate chapter for Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated in the state of Illinois. And whereas the city of Urbana acknowledges the wonderful example that Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Pi Psi chapter, has been to the Urbana community throughout its 85-year history and is appreciative of the rich legacy that it exemplifies. Now, therefore, I, Laurel Lunt Pressing, Mayor of the City of Urbana, Illinois, do hereby proclaim October 29th, 2014 as Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated Pi Psi Chapter Day in the City of Urbana.
Thank you. Also, I have a notice from Bishop King James Underwood and Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood. Do not wish to speak, but are still concerned about the Ellis subdivision sewer problem. And we also have Mr. Peter Resnick, who would like to speak and give us an update on the IDOT Traffic Stop Data Task Force. Thank you.
Good evening. I tried to make it down last week, and you folks were too quick for me before I got my shoes on. You were out the door. Very efficient. But I've come tonight simply to give you a quick update. I noticed in going through the resolution that you passed that created the task force that I'm supposed to give a bi-monthly report to you, which I have failed to do so far. So I figured by way of penance I would come and just give you a quick update tonight. In the future I'll be giving you written reports as per the resolution, but I wanted to give you at least an opportunity to ask any questions you might have after I give a short update. Just by way of what we've been doing, in June and July we were basically setting up our bylaws and doing introductions and setting up the tasks we would engage in. The last 3 months, August, September, and October, we've been doing the research and the work of our subcommittees. We've got 4 subcommittees we created. A statistical analysis subcommittee to look at the actual traffic stop statistics and look at the disparities among races. A police procedure and public engagement subcommittee, which is looking at how the police and the public are interacting, what procedures are being used for traffic stops, and to start to enumerate those. We've got a community impact subcommittee, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and a social science subcommittee, which is basically looking at the research in the area. And we have a few task force members assigned to each of the committees. What we plan to do is have each of them present final reports that will then be collected into a large final report to the City Council. We are chugging along at a reasonable rate. I am hopeful that we will actually finish by the deadline you've given us, and it seems to be promising, and my task is to get all that information together at the end. I mentioned the community impact, and I wanted to talk to that just a bit. We're looking at the causes of the disparities we see in traffic stops, but we're also spending a good deal of time talking about and looking into the impacts of those traffic stops. Some of those impacts are, of course, monetary. People get traffic tickets. Some of them are social impacts, and I think we as a task force decided that we want to look at both of those pieces of information. Obviously, if you're much more likely to be pulled over for doing the same thing that might occur in a different neighborhood, that's going to lead to some inherent unfairness. And if it's just because of the neighborhood you happen to live in, that's going to create certain kinds of impacts, especially because some of the neighborhoods we're talking about that have this impact are low-income neighborhoods. That monetary impact's going to be felt especially hard. But we also want to look at the social impacts, and there are many that we've been reading about and finding research on with regard to simply the social effects of being pulled over more often because you happen to live in a particular neighborhood. Obviously, how we weigh those social impacts against any positives that might come from doing extra traffic stops is something that we're also looking into. And one of the things we're doing next is we're going to start asking the community to come and give input as to how those impacts are affecting them and what kinds of balance we should be seeing. We are also starting to look into, with the Police Procedures Subcommittee, what those procedures are, and we will be asking the police department to give us more input on how they engage in those procedures and how they're used. Finally, I just wanted to let you know that in the end, we're going to come up with a report. It is likely to outline a bunch of things to be done in the future beyond the life of the task force. So you are likely to get a bunch of new work to do or to give to someone else to do as a result. We think that there are going to be many more meetings, discussions about this topic going forward into the future. So that's all I've got by way of an overview report, and hopefully by December you will get a regular bi-monthly written report from me if there are any changes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
And we'll invite you back to give
When-
us a full report. and we look forward to
Absolutely.
that.
When our committees and the task force as a whole has completed its full report, I'm sure I'm going to want to schedule some time on the regular
Agenda.
Thank
you so much. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. At this time, I have no other public participation, so we'll move on to the agenda items. We have before us ordinance number 2014-10-100, an ordinance amending Schedule F of Section 23 through 83 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code designating one-way streets and alleys, Oregon Street between Cedar Street and Birch Street. Mr. Gray, I assume you're here to talk about that?
I am, yes, thank
All
you.
right.
The report in the packet, Oregon Street One-Way westbound at Leal Elementary School. Some of you who are familiar with this situation are probably wondering, why is this even on the agenda? This has been happening
am.
since 1997, and you're correct. What we failed to do was, since 97, is codify this, and we discovered it through looking at our schedules of one-way streets when council took action not too long ago in Wiley School, and took this to the Traffic Commission and wanted to go through the cleanup, if you will, of making this official. So this has been in effect for a long time. We've had recent discussion with the current principal and school district officials. They're fine with its effectiveness and would not like to see it change. What we need to do is make it official, so that's why this ordinance is before you.
All right, thank you. Any questions about cleaning up this? Mr. Smythe?
I move to send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions about this before we make it legal? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you, Mr. Gray. Next, we have a presentation, an enterprise zone application progress update from Community Development. That's a lot of people. This looks really serious.
Yeah. We've been going around as a group to many meetings at our other agencies that we hope will participate, and lion's share of the presentations have been made by Kate Ferrer and Brendan Boyes, and just working together as a team. So I think, Kate, are you going to start off tonight then?
Yes.
All right.
So just
First,
to,
I think we should congratulate Kate. Just
Congratulations, Kate.
thanks.
Is that her recent marriage, is it?
Yes, yeah.
I didn't know why. I just didn't want to get in all in her business. You know, just-
well, and good luck. Fresh off her honeymoon, probably chased off the islands by hurricanes.
See, you didn't expect
right?
him to get so personal, did you?
Yeah, no.
All right.
Okay, so just to remind everyone, we are applying for a new enterprise zone designation that would take effect on January 1st, 2016. And this application to the state will be due on December 31st of this year. So we're really getting down to the last few phases here that we've been working on. As Libby said, we have had a lot of success working with our taxing partners, setting up meetings with their staff and with their boards to explain how the program would work and how we would envision them participating alongside the city. And they've been very receptive to that information as we've gone forward with the plans to have them vote on this. So one of the things I included was sort of a timeline of when these votes will be taking place. I would anticipate that most of the boards will vote on the topic of whether to participate with us in early and mid-November. Then the county will vote, and finally, of course, the city will vote on whether to approve the final enterprise zone designation. So far, Parkland College has decided to vote to approve, so they will sign a resolution when it becomes available. And this week, the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District will also vote on whether to approve, and that'll be on Wednesday. So we are on track with all of these districts. There are a lot of them. We have been to a lot of presentations. I feel like I could give the presentation in my sleep at this point. And let's see if there's anything else. We also included a draft map and our draft comprehensive, or our draft policy, which has been well received. We think it's very simple to understand, and it's going to be simple to implement, hopefully. So if there's any other questions, we can answer. Otherwise, we're anticipating returning to council at early December with more updates on who has voted and remaining steps for the application.
Wonderful. Council comments, questions? Why don't we just go down the row here, Mr. Roberts, you start.
Can an enterprise zone and a TIF district overlap? It seems like on the map they do.
They can and do overlap. There are plenty of benefits that can still be received by a business that's in both the TIF and the enterprise zone, with the exception of a property tax abatement. If you are in a TIF district, you cannot receive a property tax abatement through the enterprise zone. So that's the only restriction the state places on having those two districts overlap each other.
So they offer compatible opportunities for development.
Yes, if you're in the enterprise zone and the TIF, you can still, for example, take advantage of the sales tax exemption certificate. So that's an advantage that a business might still want even though they're in a TIF district.
And I had one other question. We're obviously putting a lot of Urbana property, especially in the undeveloped areas, into the district. Certainly, it's fine to include as many as we can that would encourage growth in the community. I just wanted to ask about Stone Creek being a part of that. I realize it's not built out, and is that why we're hoping to complete the build-out of Stone Creek as a development?
Yes, we did target those subdivisions that have seen some stagnated growth over the last few years in hopes that this will reduce the differential for people looking to build homes in Urbana and encourage those build-outs to be completed.
And how does this affect property that's actually owned by the university? I'm thinking of what looks like Orchard Downs area. How does that work into the mix?
Orchard Downs was included because it's a potential redevelopment area. The university, if that property remains in university or public non-taxable ownership, it's not going to receive any benefit from the enterprise zone. But in the event, in the next 20 years, a redevelopment proposal went through to redevelop that privately, then the enterprise zone would be in place to provide incentives for that redevelopment. And also, that property is actually in our metro zone, and the nature of that agreement is that we want to encourage redevelopment and new investment in the properties on our side of the metro zone. So at this point, the university is really holding the keys on that site, but we're going to do what we can to offer incentive to encourage it in the future.
And I'm really excited that there's a lot of property on in the north section of the city, North Cunningham. So seems good. Thank you.
Mr. Madigan.
So I had raised this question earlier when we had some discussions about all of this that's going on with regard to Behringer Commons and the existing tax incentive. How does this affect that? Because there's already a 7-year
That's right.
abatement of the city taxes. How does this affect that?
I believe that we would treat them as mutually exclusive, so a property owner would have to choose one, and the Behringer rebate is more lucrative. So I would assume most property owners who have that option available to them would take the 7-year 100%, I believe. I'd have to check. I'm not sure quite of the level of participation on Behringer. We've done a lot of work to make sure we have a lot of taxing partners participating in the zone, and I guess I don't know the roster, so that maybe could create a differential for Behringer.
I think everybody in the subdivision's eligible.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, that continues under that annexation agreement. It's possible there's some development types in Behringer that would benefit from the new enterprise zone, however, so we haven't excluded it.
What would be the reason to make them mutually exclusive and not just to say double bubble it? I mean, that's a great incentive.
Mm-hmm.
The houses out there are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. I mean, ultimately, the city gains from that.
It's true, but we can only abate the new increment once. So once any new increment that's created through a new project is abated, then there's nowhere else to go. So you can't really stack these incentives. It's really going to be.
We're talking about an enterprise zone. We're talking about sales tax on the construction materials, correct?
I take. I was talking about property tax abatements. You can do sales tax exemption in addition to the Behringer rebate.
So you could have the property, you could have the sales tax exemption, and you could also get the incentive.
I would assume we would do it as your choice of one of the abatements, and I would assume most residents would go for.
Gotcha. So you could get the sales tax on your construction, and you could also get an abatement.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's similar of how it would work in a TIF district when you have a competing incentive program in place, although there is no choice there. The statute is decided for property owners in that case.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Marlin?
I noticed that Parkland is not participating in the property tax abatement on residential construction. Do taxing bodies, I assume, I didn't realize they have a choice whether or not to participate in pieces of this. So are we anticipating any other taxing bodies opting out of the property tax abatements, or are the rest of them in?
At this time, we haven't heard of anyone else that would like to opt out of part of the property tax abatement. I believe Parkland College is especially focused on those companies that create jobs that are suitable for their students and that support their economic development goals. So I think for them, that was a choice that made sense for how they wanted to participate. And of course, we would rather have their participation in part than not at all. At this time, it sounds like many of the other districts will participate as the program is presented in its entirety, but of course we're being sensitive to their needs and how they feel they should participate as a taxing body.
Okay. And then this definition of a new job with a $10 an hour minimum and 35 hours a week, I'm assuming you can have a mix. They don't all have to be at that level or above. You can have, as long as you meet that minimum criteria of 10 jobs or 50 jobs, then you can have a mixture of management and hourly wages, or how does that work?
the definition of a full-time job that we've put into the program is taken from the Illinois Small Business Job Creation Tax Credit. I think I got it right. It's a mouthful. It's a great program that we're encouraging, and it sort of strikes a balance between ensuring that a job is of a basic quality, but also being attainable for many small employers. So we do intend to require that as the definition of a job creation. However, I think we would be recognizing full-time equivalency, which is the structure of that definition, and also it does not mean if you're hourly or you're on a salary, you wouldn't be discounted. It's the you can receive that total equivalent wage over a year, I think is how it's written. So we would not, by definition, we would not recognize $9 an hour jobs under this proposal.
Okay. And I had wondered about, thank you for the information about Orchard Downs, but I had wondered about Research Park or other university property, or anything else potentially in the enterprise zone, or is Orchard Downs the only one?
At this time, that's all we've included. We debated including more properties to the west. However, when we looked at the development potential or the likelihood that those would develop in 20 years, it seemed that there would be a pretty major decision point that would have to occur with the university. And if that happened, we felt that we could file for a amendment to the boundary at that time. So in general, we've been pretty aggressive, including properties that are potentially developable. But we reached a point where we decided to draw back, and some of the areas where we cut back, also you'll notice near between the proposed extension of Olympian and Cunningham Avenue, that we took properties out there as well, because there would be a very visible decision by the community to move forward with the complete extension of that road, and that would be a very good thing to piggyback on. That would make an amendment very likely if we needed to.
Okay. I have one last question. Go ahead.
If I might add on the mapping, for the research park, that will likely be included in the Champaign side, and the properties to the east are really shown for academic or South Farms use. So that's why they weren't included here. The criteria that we used in developing the potential map included zoning designations, comp plan designations. Outside of the city, we looked at the county's land resource management plan, and in particular the contiguous urban growth area boundary, what they call the CUGA boundary, sanitary service lines, ownership patterns, interest in development. We have another map that shows this broken down by the commercial industrial areas versus residential. It's roughly 2/3 commercial industrial and 1/3 residential. And just some of the details that we've added since our last report to you was to set the levels of participation that would be necessary between residential and commercial industrial. So it's 80,000 for residential, which reflects kind of a minimal investment for a new single-family home, including Habitat for Humanity homes. And the commercial industrial, we're sticking with the 100,000. And the job creation, stepping up the incentives for job creation, we really wanted to respond to some of the heightened incentives that Champaign was offering, and this was a more simplified version of doing that. So we did get some feedback from the county board on the extent of the map, and just seeing isolated, it looked like there was a development shown out, well outside the city limits, but it really does match that CUGA line and potential future development, and as well as ownership, where they've been shown interest in developing along Olympian and Lincoln and Cunningham. So hope that helps.
I have one last question. I've been hearing some concerns about, I don't know how to, I guess I could call them imbalanced incentives when you combine an enterprise zone with the TIF district and then direct financial incentives. Certain areas of the city people locating in certain areas of the city may be eligible for a whole lot more direct and indirect incentives than someone else? And how have you approached the idea of keeping incentives somewhat balanced across the city so geographic location doesn't give one business or commercial or even a residential owner a huge advantage over another?
With the new map for the enterprise zone, we sought to be, as I mentioned before, sort of aggressively inclusive at the onset. So we literally started off by including every commercial and industrially zoned property in the city. We used aerials to determine every subdivided single-family residential area that had not been fully developed. And then we included basically a third of a mile beyond the city boundaries and identified all the parcels there. That was how we started, and we really tried to only whittle back when we felt like there was a legitimate obstacle to development, either from zoning, from land use planning, all the reasons Libby mentioned, if there wasn't going to be sewer infrastructure in a reasonable time frame. Or as in some cases with the university or other major property owners, that it was unlikely to change. The ownership or the investment of the property was static and would likely remain that way for 20 years. So the new enterprise zone is about as inclusive as it can be, both on if you're wanted to do an investment in commercial or an industrial property or build a new home. Now, the only exception to that might be if you're going to do some residential infill. We felt it would be very problematic to try to go and include all of our existing neighborhoods because you never quite know where that new developable lot will be in the event a home needed to come down or something like that. So, so really the issue is, and the enterprise zone I feel is quite equitable, frankly, and I'm proud of the map we've created so far. The TIF districts is where you'll see that there's a difference. But as the process we're just starting to go through now and studying whether or not we're going to be creating a new downtown TIF district to replace the expiring TIF 1, there are requirements that the state will force us to prove that this area has many older buildings, it has excess coverage of cement, that it's experiencing degradation. So you aren't going to see the same kind of, I mean, Southeast Urbana is not going to be eligible for a TIF district anytime soon. East Urbana is going to be difficult to put a TIF district in. Philo Road could be getting there. There's some issues with that area. North Lincoln, where we're seeing a lot of area that there's properties up there that could be improved upon, beautified, and there's certainly an impetus for more investment. So we have to meet those criteria is the key issue, and therefore the inequity, the perceived inequity of that is really attributed to what we are able to justify for the creation of a TIF district, which is a major process.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a great start, and I appreciate having the developments that are like Stone Creek, where we already have the infrastructure, and Behringer needs to be built out. And the interesting thing with the new county properties, before we didn't have in the enterprise zone, so now it's interesting to see what kind of properties we can include at the start outside the county. Like the fairgrounds, I thought was interesting that was in there. I wondered if you'd had any conversations with the Fair Association, or if you just decided that on your own that would be good to put in there. And then the other one, I had a question that maybe Libby answered as far as contiguity, or it looks like most of these, if they developed, would be immediately annexable, is that the right word, to the city. But there's one, like Brickyards already has the infrastructure, but is it just that it's too far away, it has that gap, and we wouldn't be able to annex it, even though, it's not good for city taxes, it would contribute to school taxes and county taxes, and I just wondered why that wasn't included.
We were really seeking to not extend too far out into the county and not result in any kind of sprawling effects by extending the enterprise too far in areas that weren't shown for more immediate development. So it's probably why we didn't look out that far. So we didn't look specifically at Brickyards. I think the county could be concerned with too much of an expansion through the enterprise zone. That might be an amendment someday or another phase. It seemed just a little too far out there for this particular effort. We do have limits on the size of the enterprise zone. So we wanted to be well below the maximum, which our first map wasn't, and so we scaled back, so we had to make some sacrifices there.
Thank you.
You'd asked about the fairgrounds. We felt that it's in such a central location that it could be a key conversation within 20 years. So we didn't have any specific conversations at this time, but we felt that its central location made it kind of obvious to include, kind of for the same reasons that we looked at Orchard Downs. It's probably in the same vein that if something happened there, it could happen relatively quickly.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Charlie.
I don't have so much a question as a comment, since I've been following this a little more closely and discussing this with Brandon and Kate and Libby before. I really appreciate the team approach that's been used here. They've drawn on all kinds of resources across the city, across the county, you know, brought in GIS stuff, things like that. And then the collaborative effort that we've gone out to work with other taxing bodies, other units of government. And I think that really strengthens this application to the state. I think that's a really important piece of this, and I just want to stress that that will, I think, make this stronger when it gets evaluated at the state level.
Thank you.
The council may be interested to know as well that the Cunningham Township will also be approached for its participation in the enterprise zone. And that's on the schedule. So,
Thank you all. Thank you for the update on the application. Unless there's a new item, Mr.
Some other time.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation.
thank you.
All right. We'll move on to item number 7, resolution number 2014-10-056R, a resolution authorizing the entry into and execution of an agreement between the City of Urbana, Illinois, and the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois Public Arts Commission. And Brandon's back.
Yeah, I'll be speaking to that.
All right, let's
So
go.
the resolution and attached agreement would establish a non-endowed fund with the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. That would be for the purpose of raising funds to support the public arts program. This arrangement is nearly identical to the one previously entered into by the City Council or the City for the Legacy Tree program. We would establish this fund with $500 of unexpended funds from the public arts budget from 2013-14. And funds raised, same arrangement as the Legacy Tree program, would be subject to, I think it's about a 1% fee on a rolling basis. So an affordable option for the city. Staff is recommending approval.
Mr. Smythe.
Yeah, quick question for you, Brandon. I like this approach. It clearly meets the needs of the city. And I'm looking at Jim because he knows what I'm going to ask, which is, can we do the same thing for UPTV? Because they have a need also in terms of being able to, say, solicit advertisers for covering high school sports events, which are very popular on UPTV, and yet there's no avenue for them to make any money on it that would support the station.
I don't think I heard all of the question. I lost the first half of
yeah,
it.
well, can we use this same approach of using, like, we've talked about some kind of third party that could handle advertising for UPTV,
Sure.
sponsored by.
Sure.
Could this same group,
UPTV can, there can be, with the Community Foundation, a fundraising program can be set up for UPTV, and there just has to be a delineation insofar as what the funds are used for. If it's advertising, it's advertising, or solicitation of advertisers.
okay, I would encourage us to pursue that if that's a viable option for them as well.
Mr.
Hopefully
Jacobson.
Sanford's listening.
Yeah, I might just, from the perspective of being the council representative on the Public Arts Commission, I might just provide that sort of perspective. I think the council has, since before I was on the council, and certainly has continued to regard it as a public good and a public obligation to enhance the life of the community by supporting public art. On the other hand, there's a recognition that public resources are limited. So what I think one of the motivations behind this and a lot of the discussion was that the Public Arts Commission wants to retain a balance. You know, we wish to, continue to support art with public resources. We want to extend our reach. The Public Arts Commission wishes to extend its reach by being able to augment public funds with private funds. But I think it should be pointed out that what's necessary here is an appropriate balance. One doesn't want to get in the position of being solely dependent on private donors for public art, because then you're under a lot of pressure maybe to put in something in public view that the donor wants, but may not, it may not be, just from the point of view of a citizen commission, may not be the best thing. On the other hand, there are people who wish to and contribute to the common good. So this is really a step towards being able to establish that public-private balance.
Other questions, Mr. Madigan?
Not a question so much as a comment. I appreciate this approach as well. I, for one, don't relish being the jerk on the council who votes against the public art acquisition. And this is a way to encourage businesses to contribute. And I appreciate Eric's comments. He was far more artful than I would have been in conveying, which is pretty much my position as well. It's let's encourage private donation. Let's not necessarily encourage private directed donation, but donation for the public good. So I appreciate the approach. I do have one question. You said something about a 1% fee that perked my ears. I am not finding a fee for what and on whom.
Yeah, the endowment charges, the non-endowed fund charges a small fee on it's the balance of the fund over, I think, a 4-quarter average. So I believe that's the exact same arrangement. I'm sorry it's not in the memo, and I don't actually see it spelled out in the agreement, but it is, should be the same arrangement as the Legacy Tree program has.
If this agreement, and I've not seen the agreement, is structured like the Legacy Tree fund agreement, to manage the monies, they invest the monies, to grow the monies, and to manage the monies and do the bookkeeping, and given the fact that they are fiduciaries, they charge like a mutual fund might charge a 1% fee of what's in the fund. And that's how they calculate it.
Okay, and just for the record, who is they?
The Community Trust of East Central Illinois. It's a private, not-for-profit foundation.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Marlin?
That kind of caught my attention too. On page 7, number 4, there is no specific fee mentioned. It says they shall be entitled to reimbursement for expenses and to compensation for management of the fund in accordance with its customary fees as established from time to time by the Community Foundation. I think for next week it would be nice to know what the fee is.
Sure.
We can find that, and
they ought to be able to tell us.
It is, yeah, we can, and I believe it is a 1%, and the way that's written, I assume they probably have the same fee structure for all their non-endowed funds, but we can look into that.
I didn't get the complete packet this week, so I didn't have a chance to read if there's an agreement attached. but it is a fixed fee in the agreement for the Legacy Treat program. And I believe it's 1%, I'm not positive on that, but it is a fixed fee. It's not it isn't like CAM for a shopping center where it can fluctuate based on the actual expenses incurred. They've obviously done their due diligence and have figured out what, in terms of the money they manage across all of these endeavors, as well as all the other endeavors they engage in for fundraising for themselves and other organizations, what it typically should cost them for management and all the things that Diane mentioned.
And I would agree with Diane. It ought to be a fixed rate set in the agreement. So if we can work that out, I think everybody will be very supportive.
So if there's no approval on the floor, Mr. Smythe?
I move to send this to council with recommendation for approval pending additional information.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Mr. Jacobson. Any other discussion on the item? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
I think you're staying. We have ordinance number 2014-10-101, an ordinance approving a redevelopment agreement, second amended and restated with Cake Design Development LLC, 206-208-210 West Main Street. Brandon again?
And I'll also be discussing the next item as well,
All right. Oh, well,
if you'd like to.
sure, you can discuss them both at once.
Okay. The two ordinances would provide for a second amended and restated redevelopment agreement with Cake Design Development and a corresponding budget amendment to fund the amended agreement. The redevelopment of 206, 208, and 210 West Main Street has been a success for downtown Urbana. There's over 15 startups occupying the building now. The space and also includes Personify, which is the corporate headquarters of a recent graduate of the Enterprise Works incubator out at the Research Park, a growing company that has offices in Chicago and Vietnam as well. The renovation of these long underutilized spaces was originally budgeted at $630,000. However, the project ultimately totaled over $915,000 in TIF-eligible expenses. The current agreement, as it stands with Cake Design Development, was only intended to accommodate reimbursement up to $128,000. Had staff and the developer been aware of the increased costs, especially on account of structural and code-related needs, the original agreement would have sought to provide for a higher level of incentive. So staff is proposing a second amendment, a second amended and restated agreement with Cake Design Development, which would provide incentive of 20% reimbursement for the full amount of the project, totaling $55,000. Again, it's difficult to state just how, I guess, much of an impact this project's had, and it's garnered a lot of positive press, young entrepreneurial activity, and a lot of events as well. So staff is recommending approval.
Questions? Mr. Madigan?
So it may be hard to judge its impact in your, to summarize what you just said, but take a shot. How many of these businesses are actually producing sales tax revenue or any other kind of measurable impact for the city?
In the agreement, or in the memo, the two that generate sales tax revenue for the city, Pizza M and Cafeteria and Company, I'm sorry, the two businesses are Pizza M and Flying Machine Coffee. They're expected to produce about $300,000 in local sales tax. I say over an 11-year period in the fiscal impact discussion because that's the anticipated payback in property taxes, I believe, for the agreement. So there will be a fiscal payback to the community even at the increased levels. It won't come back to the TIF because the TIF is expiring, but there is a net positive fiscal benefit to the city and especially those entities which collect sales tax, the county and the school district. However, the number of jobs created, I think, is the more difficult part to quantify, and the prospect that some of these growing startups that have set up shop here in the community, there's a potential that they could grow and actually become mid-size or even large performing companies. And I think that's the real achievement of this development, that we have a fountain of youth creativity and talent right next door at the University of Illinois, but we don't have a lot of mechanisms for capturing that creative talent and retaining it here outside of our private employers. And in addition to housing a couple employers that are of sufficient skill to hire talented folks, we've got a number who've taken matters into their own hands and are working to create their own businesses, but also create a culture and an environment in which students and talented people are encouraging one another to start businesses. And that's happening in our downtown.
Don't get me wrong, I appreciate what's going on there, I really do. I just think it's important to quantify for folks who are paying the freight in town here to understand what's the ROI here. And part of my issue is we've got an incubator here, which is very exciting. These businesses grow, okay, then where do they go? So when you grow, where do you go? So what are we doing to make sure that when they do grow, they stay here in Urbana?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple different aspects to that, I'd say. One is that some of these businesses are so small that they could grow right back into Enterprise Works, because some of them didn't pass through the door of Enterprise Works. So we're fortunate to have all the resources of the university and the research park that are there for a tech business that gets to a point where it wants to attract serious VC capital, venture capital. We have, CoLab is really not an incubator in the sense that there's any direct support being provided to the businesses that locate there. They get a modest grant from the city for signing a lease for a multi-year period, but that's all the support they're getting. There actually is a boutique incubator as well in CoLab called Launchable, and that one actually does seek out businesses or small micro startups and curates them, tries to put them in touch with resources, gives them guidance on intellectual property and that kind of thing. So that's also happening. We work, of course, all the time with business owners who are looking for additional office space. So that's a service we provide in-house, that we're regularly trying to connect businesses with offices and other spaces in Urbana. But if it comes down to it, an Urbana business is growing, we'd rather see them stay in Champaign-Urbana than Urbana proper. So we will always pass off our business interests if we can't meet their needs in Urbana to the EDC or to the city of Champaign to help them. Of course, Champaign has some interesting models as well. M2 has the enclave space. That's a more expensive proposition. Generally, you see more developed businesses locating there. And then beyond that, it's interesting. County Plaza has now, they just got a new, I think, a 10-person tech firm that grew out of the university, moved into M2, and then came back into the enclave, and then came back around to establish its own office in County Plaza. And there's a video game developer and another tech firm, Nina Paley, who does quiltimations. I know it's kind of far out, but she programs like a industrial quilting machine to make really complex patterns. So the fact that these businesses are just sort of inhabiting County Plaza, even though it isn't a branded cool space, it's becoming that. So I think our incentive programs also go a ways to provide that helping hand, and also the enterprise zone, because frankly, even if that tech business isn't going to be investing in the property, their landlord is, and those incentives are there to help facilitate that transition. So I know that's kind of a long answer. We do everything we can to try to help them, and the EDC and the Small Business Development Center are a direct link to a lot of those businesses too.
Yeah. Mr. Robertson, then Brown.
All that being true, the redevelopment and the funds that we're talking about here really have to do with the building itself. Is
That's
that
correct.
Right? It has nothing to do with the multitude of small businesses that are being incubated, but it has to do with the brick and mortar of the building itself that's on Main Street.
That's correct.
And so one might say that these higher funds might be just a building override, not override, but a budget override for construction estimates. But basically, we're allowing for the fact that to make the building secure, these funds are necessary. They've already been spent. They're redeemable to the TIF district. And so we're going to widen our belt a little bit and honor them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, it's a little odd to be asked to provide an incentive after it's done, but I think since it's 20% of the reimbursable costs, which is what you would approve, from what I understand our TIF incentive program to be, if it was less than $25,000, it would be an administrative thing. And if something like this happened, if somebody was building a kitchen and it cost $50,000, you'd reimburse $10,000, I guess. But if they ran over and it turned out to cost them $100,000, would you go back retroactively and say, "Oh, you ran over. We understand the problems. We'll go ahead and reimburse you the $20,000"? Would you do that administratively as well?
Yes, because we approve a % level of reimbursement and we approve a cap. So those are the two things we approve, and it's really not, the incentive doesn't actually occur until they cross the finish line and get a certificate of occupancy, which is the standard by which we know that they've met all their code requirements and the project's completed as they had set out to do. So really at that time, that's when we count up the points that they set out to achieve, which could include energy efficiency, it could include new apartment units, it could include facade improvements. There's a number of criteria. So we tell businesses what they're going to score up front, but it is ultimately predicated on them fulfilling those requirements. And yes, if the project went over and was below the cap, they would receive the full amount they were entitled to.
So, but for the scale, then it's really pretty consistent with our TIF policies, and it wouldn't even have come to us unless it was a big scale. And it's nice to see a big scale project like that, and it's, in a way, it's nice to be able to look at a project after it's done and be satisfied with it before you vote on the TIF. And it's not like you went out and spent a lot of money on imported marble for the ceiling and floors or something. And so, I think he did a good job being responsible as far as, keeping the costs down and everything. And I'm inclined to support this. I think the only other thing is, with all these TIF agreements, it seems like it comes down to the financial part is the money's there. We never get really a good view of what other projects might be happening in the future as far as, what are we giving up if we fund this project? Is there something that's coming, that's potentially coming in a couple years that we might have wanted the money for? Mm-hmm. So I tried to kind of look at the TIF budget myself since we don't have a lot of financial information. And it looks like, I know the Boneyard payment's coming out of that TIF, and we probably made half a payment, I think, this year, have another half payment, so it'd be another $500,000. But it's been pretty consistently about $1.2 million left in the fund balance. We also, with TIF money, sometimes make surplus distributions to other entities, and I know for the school district in TIF 1, it's contractual. It was kind of built into the TIF. What happens if we have leftover money at the end of the year in a TIF and it's not contractual? Is there another mechanism to refund surplus to the taxing bodies? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I do.
If we ended up with $2 million at the end of the year in a TIF, is it possible, advisable, required, or any of those things to refund some of the surplus? How's that work?
Ordinarily, surpluses might be awarded at the end of a TIF. There are some occasions, though, when an agency might declare surplus while a TIF is continuing. I know they did that one time in Champaign. It's very unusual. Usually you're working on a redevelopment plan that has so many demands on it that you don't have that ability. I think what we've been able to do in working with our park district and school district in particular has really helped us move our TIFs along and include them as active partners with our joint review board. But I would not recommend that the city do surplus payments in the middle of a redevelopment plan implementation. TIF 3, ironically looking back, TIF 3 was one TIF where we really almost pretty much ran out of redevelopment opportunities and still had increment, and we were able to do projects in that TIF to benefit the school district and the park district, and really dig deep down into the neighborhood to assist. That was an unusual circumstance, and hopefully we will be able to distribute our surplus someday from that TIF.
Just one follow-up. Also, I noticed in looking at that this year, I don't think it was actually budgeted in the TIF because maybe we didn't realize what the tax rates were going to be, but because the taxes increased by 10% this year, it looks like the TIF's got kind of a windfall from that tax increase. So TIF 2, I think, got an extra $120,000 or something like that. I guess in lieu of refunding surplus, if there was a way we could do projects with the school district that would allow them to not tax the maximum that they're allowed to tax, so that we can work on that other goal of trying to equalize our tax rates a little bit, then I would definitely be in favor of something like that.
Ms. Marlin?
Just to follow up on the point Bill was making, we get these redevelopment agreements one at a time, which is the way they're going to come to us, but which means we're handing out TIF money a little bit at a time, but we never get, at least I don't have the full picture, and I'm thinking ahead to the development of the Goodyear block and dealing with 202 West Green, whose fate at this point is unknown, which are both in TIF 2, I think. Are we, I'm sure you're planning, but how are we, it'd be nice to get an update in terms of how the city is planning for these potentially big expenses in relation to these smaller incremental incentives that are being paid out.
That normally happens during the budgeting period, where larger incentives are often included at that time when we know that they're coming. However, there is a challenge to negotiating an agreement and having that be compatible with that budget time frame.
Right.
So what staff does owe council is a more comprehensive look at all of our particular TIF. This came up when we were first talking about the study for the new downtown TIF district, to go more in depth on our TIF districts, a study session, and that might be an opportunity to dig down and lay out the bigger picture to council, because we owe you that presentation as had been requested before.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Smythe.
Okay, well, as many of you know, I was in Santa Monica last week for the kickoff of the Next Century Cities, which is a collection of 32 cities doing fiber to the home, various gigabit type projects, including Chattanooga, Lafayette, and 30 other cities, Champaign and Urbana being two of them. The point, though, was that we started out on Monday morning at the Crossroads campus, which is one of 3 Santa Monica incubators. It is very similar to CoLab, Matt Cho's operation, except that it has over 120 people or different businesses starting out in that space. Bishop, much higher density sort of place. Anyway, the founder of Crossroads hosted the President Obama 10 days before our event, and he got on stage to welcome us, and his comment was that millennials need government to provide the infrastructure, including such things as high-speed internet, to enable them to innovate. Government matters, and I think we're very fortunate to have tapped the current millennial-driven entrepreneur mindset for the city of Urbana, filling a couple of niches, and we're seeing it spill over into other places like the the old, the County Plaza building. Trying to remember, I know it under several different names. I got to get the right one. You know, I think we're very fortunate there, and whatever we can do to encourage continuous development, and then, you know, the businesses that are successful out of there, keep them in Urbana. That's just a great thing. And, you know, the other thing that staff owes us is a revised, you know, home business piece, and that's somewhere in the hopper, and you know, we'll get to that, but that's part of the whole comprehensive thing that we're looking at of how do we do business in the modern 21st century. You know, what are the new tools that we have to be developing? What are the incentives? How do we have to make the adjustments? You know, they have a different incentive program now out of TIF than they did several years ago. You know, these small grant type things. They don't all succeed, but many of them really get us going. So I think we're really fortunate, and I totally support this. So I will move to send this council recommendation, both of these, to council with the recommendation for approval.
I'll second that.
So just for correction, item 9, Mr. Smythe, although we don't need Brandon for that, we didn't do an omnibus on that, and it's a revising of the annual budget, so we'll just take them separately. And we'll keep ordinance 2014-10-101. Who seconded that?
I did that.
Mr. Roberts, okay. Any other questions or comments on item number 8? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll move item 9 then.
Thank you.
The
Thank you,
budget.
Brandon. We have ordinance number 2014-10-102, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance fiscal year 2014-15, redevelopment agreement, second amended and restated Cake Design Development LLC. Any questions on that item? All right, Mr.
I would
Smythe.
move that to council recommendation for approval.
Moved by
And
Mr. Smythe, second.
I
by
would take the second.
Mr. Roberts. Any other questions or comments on that item? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that one passed. Mr. Smythe.
Okay, given that we're at the end of the agenda, I move that we go into closed session for the purposes of property acquisition issues pursuant to 5 Illinois Consolidated Statutes 120/2 C5.
Second.
Second by Ms. Marlin. Any questions, comments? All in favor of closed
We
session?
got a roll call.
Clerk calls the roll. Yes, please.
Ms. Ammons?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Madigan?
Yes.
Ms. Marlin? Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Mayor Pressing?
Yes.
As approved, council moves into closed session, and we'll return in a few minutes. All right, we
I move that we go back into open session.
Second?
moved by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Mr. Jacobson. All in favor of reopening our session?
Aye.
No.
I left my computer up there.
The clerk wants to do a roll call for our vote.
I think it's
All right.
Ms. Ammons?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Madigan?
Yes.
Ms. Marlin?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Mayor Pressing?
Yes.
There being no other business of the committee of the whole, I move adjournment.